Rey Speeder by Jazz Inc. It's an incredible 6-scale model. The size is just huge when you get this in person, and it has great sculptural detail. But I think I could improve on the paint job just a bit. There we go. Now this reminds me of the vehicle I saw on screen. And the best part is I did this with a handful of different paints and inks. No big deal, because it's not really a repaint. It's just some weathering. It's a process that's fun to do and to watch. So stay tuned for this episode of Crafted. And welcome back to another episode of Crafted by Metamorphic Customs. The sculptural detail on this Jazz Inc. Rey's Speeder is pretty darn good. And the casting? Perfect. The piece I received had no defects. It was actual perfection, to be honest. Now, the paint job is a little soft, especially in the chipped areas. So what I want to do is try to take it to that next level by just adding some weathering. Not a full repaint, which I did think about, but I don't think it needs it. And here you have that weathering. So let's talk about how we actually did that. Let's start back at the top. Now, what I've done here is just added some masking tape, because believe it or not, this has a racing stripe, if you will, that's in a lighter yellow. And that stripe is actually in the piece, in this Speeder as it comes from Jazz Inc., but it's really faded, and it should be, but it's so faded that you can barely tell it's there. I want it to be a little bit more visible, at least for me. That's how I prefer it. I'm not going for a definitive movie, 100% movie accurate, just trying to get this a little closer to what I think it looks like in the movie based on that image I have in my head, right? So the first step here was to mix some red and yellow from Vallejo to make an orange. It was a scarlet red and I believe a moon yellow. It doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to get a yellowish orange color, an orange that leans more to yellow. And I'm going to apply that paint, of course, with an airbrush as you see, but I'm not trying to get complete coverage or even coverage. This is kind of easy. You can mess up a little bit here. That's the whole purpose. Make this look a little sloppy. After all, it's supposed to be faded, so if some of the darker orange, base orange, shows through, that'll be a good thing. Then I'll do it in the front as well and on the reverse side. Honestly, this part is easy. I think the hardest part, or the most tedious, annoying, if you will, part of this entire project is just putting on that masking tape, right? Which is kind of why I started the video with it mostly on. It's just a pain to put on and frankly not much fun to watch. But it is fun to watch someone take it off. Talk about ASMR here. But this actually came out pretty good. There was no bleeding of that orange, that lighter orange or yellowish orange. So perfect, exactly what I wanted. And I will be using, I'll be placing the weathering above this, which is perfect. It'll further dull it down. But I got some clean lines here, which is exactly what I'm looking for. Very good. Now I'm going to be using some Exhaust Manifold, which is a metal color, which is a brand, again, by Vallejo Colors. That brand or that model line, I should say, of colors by Vallejo. Again, that it's called metal color. Kind of on the nose there a bit, but that is a great line of different metallic colors for airbrush use, but they also come in handy for some regular brush, some paintbrush use here. And what I'm doing here is just defining the edge of this paint chip. The shape of this big metallic chip here is actually fairly accurate to the initial concept designs and what was on screen, I believe. But it's just the edge was a little faded. It made it look like, well, kind of what it is, like a masked off silver spray, which is cool. But again, I think it could get a little better just by defining these edges. Now, of course, what I'm doing here, I think this will make it look a little closer. I wouldn't expect, a custom shop to do this, because at this level of detail, as you can see, this is a lot of brush work, and I've sped up this part of the video, as most of the videos actually sped up, but this would take way too long to actually try to do in productions. If you're asking how does somebody like Hot Toys do this, well, it would probably be printed, either UV printed or tampo printed in various layers. So it's a machine doing this kind of work, right? This kind of weathering. But to do it by hand, which I actually enjoy this process very much so, takes a bit. But for a custom shop to do this on every piece produced by hand, probably not really cost effective. But the point of this video is this actual weathering by hand process. And a lot of times this is the process that's used to create the initial prototypes for many products, including toys. During mass production of something like a Hot Toys, like I said, this is something like this. This kind of detail will probably be printed or tampo printed or UV printed, right? But the prototype was probably done by hand when it comes to this kind of weathering. And for me, again, this is fun and makes it look real. That attention to detail, which is exactly what I'm going for. So here I'm still using that same color, and I'm really trying to focus on that big chip in the middle. And now, as you see, I'm trying to focus on some edges here. Putting these chips, in other words, this metallic paint, on those panel edges really gives it a sense of depth, of use, and where in the world, especially when you're talking Star Wars. A lot of wear and tear. It's I wouldn't say it's unique to Star Wars, but it's definitely something you see on most Star Wars ships. Maybe with the exception of the prequels, but this is pretty easy to do. It's as you can see, it's literally just one color on a brush, and I'm kind of just hitting the edges, like I said before. This process isn't hard. What's maybe a little bit more difficult is knowing where to start and where to stop, right? You can overdo it or not do it enough. And when you're starting off with this, the best thing to do is just look at a reference picture, especially with something like this where there are reference pictures. You know, there's still images from the movie, there's the initial design work, concept work, which is actually what I'm using. I'm using the same picture. Actually, the front, at the time of this recording of this video, it's the front page picture of the product on Jazz Inc.'s website. So and that's actually a picture not of the product, but of the original concept design, I believe. I think it's a really cool picture, so that's what I'm using more or less as reference. And again, I'm not sticking 100% close to it or even 95% close to it. I'm just trying to make it look as realistic or as neat as possible. But if you're doing this, right, give it a shot. If you find it difficult to know where to put these chips and it's just not looking real for you, whether you're working on this model or something else, and you're trying to do this chip effect, right, take a look at a reference picture of the actual vehicle, whatever it is you're painting, with maybe some chipping on it, or look at a reference picture of just chipping paint anywhere and use that as reference, and it'll help out a lot. That's how I started. So a lot of this video is going to be exactly this, just the intricate chipping details. And then when we're done with that section, I'm going to move on to the tail section. And this part, this big metal chunk here, metal flake, was really soft. So I'm bringing it out here with the brush, much like I did on the front section. I'm changing the shapes here a little bit. Moving over to the other side, and guess what? More of the same. When you get a little practice, or sometimes even from the very beginning, when you're first trying this process, it could be quite soothing. Again, ASMR style, it de-stresses you. Unless you absolutely hate painting, which then you probably wouldn't be watching at this point. But what I'm trying to say is this is a nice, relaxing process. And what I do a lot of the times, because you're trying to hit those panel edges, is you use the side of the brush, right? You're not going at the very edge, that 45-degree peak or 90-degree peak of that edge with the point of your brush, because that would be difficult and rather annoying. Tedious, I should say. what I'm doing is I'm using the side of that pointed brush to lay flat on that edge of the panel and just drag it along the edge. You've got the entire side of the brush. And here I'm just working on the overall shape of this large chunk that's been chipped off, where it's faded off, whatever you want to call it. But much of what I did on the other side I'm going to do on this side too. And I'm applying the paint pretty wet, and as I deem fit I'll come back with a piece of paper towel and just kind of remove it a little bit or smudge it in there. So let's move on to some brush detailing with brown colors. I've got some FW ink on my left hand, which is sepia colored, and some Vallejo wash on my right hand, and that's dark rust color. Now I'm going to mix these two, and I'm going to pour in a mix 50-50, so 1-to-1, and I'm going to pour in a couple of drops of water, just regular water it down just a bit, and I'm going to use my brush to start hitting the edges of this this flake here, this metal, this bare metal, and by hitting the edge with brown, it'll create this rust effect. It'll look like the edges are both dirty and maybe starting to rust. I don't want to go overboard here. I don't want it to be as sharp as the metallic edge, right? So I don't want the edges of this brown wash to be as sharp. I just want it to be kind of just hinted at there, definitely enough for you to see it, but kind of faded. And that's why I go back sometimes with the tip of my finger and basically finger paint or kind of smudge the paint I placed on there if it's too much. And I'll apply the same paint around the what looks to be hinges here to represent the muddy waters, the rusty water kind of building up. And I'm just going to hit this, again, this metallic flake in the middle at random spots within it as well, just to show some random weathering. And while I do this, I might as well take a second to mention the camera angle here, which is not like any of my other, any of my past videos. And that's because this thing was way too wide and really tall to fit in the normal camera angle. So I had to back away and kind of zoom in to show the areas I was working in to get a better angle. So hopefully this isn't too bad. I think you can see the area I'm working on. So, but let me know if this annoys you. Just let me know in the comments below. And what I'm doing here is I'm using the same brown mixture, right? So again, Vallejo dark rust wash and FW inks sepia, and I'm applying it now with a small sponge. So it's a spare sponge I got from some packaging I had lying around. And I'm just applying it, as you pretty much see here, with a sponge, and then kind of wipe the paint mixture, the ink mixture off the sponge and go back and just wipe off so that it's not too much. Normally I'd say careful not to get a pooling effect. But that's technically exactly what I'm going for here. I'm creating little pools to make it look like blotches of stains. And in other cases, I'm kind of pressing down and pulling down this ink mixture to create a little bit of streaking. But right now, just kind of no particular pattern here. Again, I'm using that one reference image, but I'm not trying to stick too closely. Rather, I'm just trying to make this look cool. Weathering is a very fun process. Then I'll go back, maybe apply some with the brush, much like I was doing before, and use the sponge to feather it out, if you will. Another interesting part about these paints and these inks that I'm using here, and most of the inks and paints I normally use on my projects, is that they're all water-based and water-soluble. So they dry fairly quickly, and that allows me to come back and place, especially in this case, especially with weathering, but place more paint on top of dried paint, creating different layering effects, and again, really adding to that depth. That's what makes things look more interesting. Maybe more realistic in some cases, but definitely more interesting. And again, I'm just continuing here with this process. I'm still using the same exact simple brown ink mixture. It'll be important to get around these bolts, these screws, whatever this is in the Star Wars universe, and maybe create a couple little streaks going down, and then bring those down too. By the way, if you're following along at home on this wonderful cooking show, if you're nervous about doing this, and I can understand it can be nerve-wracking to try to do this on a model. So number one, start on something simple, even a bare piece of plastic if you want to practice. But what I was going to mention was, if you're doing this, and especially with inks, just water them down a lot. That just means that it's going to go on very light, almost invisible, right? So you can start putting on these heavily diluted inks, and if you mess up, it won't be that critical unless you're working on a plain white surface. Then the smallest, even the thinnest or the most diluted ink is still going to show up, and so it'll look like a stain. But the lighter you go, the less you'll be able to see a mess up or an accident. That said, it's weathering, so it's just all happy accidents, right? That's what Bob Ross told me. So if you ever have an accident like that, whether you're working on a bare piece of plastic for practice, or if you're working on something like this, layering it with different applications of even the same ink mixture will probably create, again, that illusion of depth, and will create an interesting surface. So don't worry too much. As you can see, I'm doing the same exact process on the other side of this speeder, and I'm focusing on the streaks. What I'll do is I'll come in pretty light, and then I'll use the benefit of this quick drying time, and like I was saying before, just layer it on there slowly if possible. You're not on a production line. This is a unique model, so you can take your time and use the same ink mixture to apply between panel lines. It'll create that shadow, that deeper shadow in the panel lines, and just emphasize them. Especially important on a weathering job like this, right? You want to make it look dirty. There's streaks and grimes everywhere, so you figured there's a lot of grime accumulating between the panels, so it only makes sense to put it there. And again, around bolts, anything that looks like a screw, just place that brown dirty grime around it, and in some cases pull it down with a brush, make it look like it's streaking. And time to give the opposite side another go. I've already done this side, but now it's time to come back here and do a couple more streaks. This is where you look at it and say, what looks good? Let's forget that concept design I'm using as a reference picture and just ask myself, well, what do I want to see? It's my model, right? So, very important. No matter what reference you're using, when you're painting your own model, building your own model, making your own diorama, just remember to ask yourself, I know I see a recipe here, or I have a list of operations, but what do I want to see here? What do I want to do different? You know, sometimes that's just about standing back once you think you're midway or you're even done, and standing back and saying, okay, well, what else can I add? Do I need to add anything else? Anyhow, what I'm doing now is I'm focusing on these afterburners. This metal too. I don't know what these are, but obviously this is where the propulsion system is. Engine would be up front, and the exhaust comes out of here and propels the speeder forward. Now, the metal color on this section and the shading, not too bad. But of course, since I'm adding so much weathering detail to the rest of it, I gotta add something here. So I'll start off by darkening a bit, and I'm using, again, FW inks, but this time I'm just using FW black. Straight, no dilution, just out of an airbrush. And I'm focusing on the crevices, like where two pieces of metal maybe come together, and where they meet the red parts, where they meet that saddle up there. Just trying to get some shadow in there. Again, you'll hear me say it many times in this video, to create more depth. While I have that FW ink, the black ink, in my airbrush, I'm going to go ahead and add some of that to the rest of the ship, not just the metal parts. I got to go back to the metal parts, but might as well use this ink here. And I'm going to darken this exhaust, either exhaust or just maybe the air that comes in through the front grille. Some of it comes out through the side. I'm not sure, but it is darker in the reference image I'm using. Kind of makes sense, so I'm going to darken that area on both sides. Then I'm going to come back and just darken random spots that I think just would look better with some dirt kind of smudging, or just, again, weathering. Anything I think looks good. Kind of looking at the reference image here, but adding my own taking some artistic license. Got to do this on both sides. And I think this kind of adds a little bit more. Running it down the bottom edge there, and a little bit on the top near panel corners. Maybe there was some grease that spilled there and was wiped off, but kind of stained the panel. Who knows? Let's just make it look interesting. Then we'll go back to this metal section here, this metal exhaust, and I'm going to use a sponge. Again, another random sponge I have a line around. I have no idea where this came from, but every time I get one in a package, I'll try to save a little chunk for these purposes. Just a piece of soft foam, and I'm going to dip that in the metal color we originally used, which was exhaust manifold, I believe. It's a little bit of a darker color, and I'm going to just press that on to create little marks here and there, little specks of maybe where the metal chipped. Then I'm going to use the FW ink, water it down a bit, maybe 1:1 FW black ink and water. I'm going to use a brush and I'm going to apply it in the recesses. And lastly, I'm going to do two things with this paint. I'm using a territorial beige color. And this is from Delta Ceram, which is a cheap hobby paint. And I'm using that territorial beige just to add some detail with a brush onto the saddle. And in some pictures, by the way, some reference pictures, the saddle looks like it's made out of metal. Another picture, it looks like it's made out of leather. Who knows? But I'm going to go with a weathered leather look. So I'm using the territorial beige. I'm just applying it on with a brush, as you see here. And then I kind of go back with a piece of paper towel, kind of wipe it off a bit or smudge it in to create that weathered effect. There's that word again, weathered. Yeah, I just confirming that is territorial beige, I believe. But basically it's just a light khaki, light beige color. And I'm going to use that same sponge, just the other end of the sponge, and that same color, territorial beige, to just speckle on some spots here and there, just creating different weathering effects. First I smudged it, I applied it with a brush, I smudged it on with a piece of paper towel. Now I'm coming back, creating these little specks. Makes it look worn and weathered. And again, let's take a look at this, how it appeared before we did anything. This is right out of the box, as Jazz Ink intended, which it looks pretty good, don't get me wrong. This is, again, the sculptural detail is beautiful. It's just that, for me, the paint apps, I think I could add a little bit to it, if I spent some time, which clearly I did. See, there's that faded back panel there, that metal chunk, which was very soft. But this painting here, this again still the original one, is not bad. I just think that now, as you see here in this image, looks a little closer to what it should look like on the screen, or what it did look like, or even that original concept image. The streaks, the grime, the leaking oil, if that's what it is, who knows. The little metal chips here and there, just tells a story. It gives it more character, as weathering usually does. And I think this came out pretty neat. I'm proud to put this on my display, on top of my detolfs, and that was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed watching that. Let me know what you think of not only the process, but of the end result. Feel free to give me your honest opinion. Did I mess up this beautiful Jazz Ink product? Is it any better? Do you think it was worth the time? Anything at all, let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead. You know what to do. You like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, check out these other episodes and stay crafted.